Welcome to Eastern Express here on TVP World. I'm Salia Strzemska, filling in for Jonasz Rywinski, and in today's episode we're going to take a look at Russia's business dealings. After Russia invaded Ukraine and the collective West followed with imposing sanctions on Moscow, Russia's economy has been running more like an underground poker game than a transparent system. It's all shady deals, hidden players, and a whole lot of bluffing. Now you might be wondering, how is this still working for Russia? Western sanctions have been fought through and should have an effect, right? Well, the story is a bit more complicated than that. Here's our report on the issue.
Figures from the second quarter of 2024 show that Russia has returned to its pre-invasion status as Europe's largest gas supplier. The EU imported nearly 13 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia. When the Kremlin turned off the gas tap amid its invasion of Ukraine, Norway grew to lead the EU's natural gas imports, followed by the US, which maxed out its liquefied natural gas shipments to support the EU. The current shift in Russian gas imports could be attributed to a decline in American LNG imports in recent months. Add to this the fact that EU gas storage facilities are averaging over 90% full, and low summer demand leads to lower spot purchases of American gas. Demand plays a significant role in the case of US LNG suppliers as opposed to Russian suppliers, whose contracts are often long-term and inflexible. Countries such as Austria, Hungary and Slovakia are ensnared in such deals. This means that they will continue to contribute to the volume of Russian gas flowing into the EU regardless of fluctuations in demand and supply. EU member states receive up to two-thirds of their Russian gas imports through the Ukraine transit and Turk Stream pipelines. The remaining third is shipped as super-chilled liquid gas to mostly Spanish, Belgian and French ports.
There is a transit contract that ends on December 31st of this year. Our main consumers in Europe do not seem to want the transit agreement to end, even though they have provided military assistance to Ukraine. Ukraine refuses our transit, which means that the amount of gas entering Europe will decrease. They will follow other routes, especially through Turk Stream, maybe also partly through Blue Stream to Turkey, although the pipeline is intended for internal use.
Although the tendency to import Russian gas prevails in the EU, Austria, for instance, made a non-binding commitment to phase out Russian natural gas supplies by 2027 in a late August update of its national security strategy. Russia's resurgence as Europe's top LNG provider comes despite sanctions agreed upon in June. No surprise there. After all, the move banned EU ports only from reselling Russian LNG, not from procuring it. The sanctions also blocked financing for Russia's planned Arctic and Baltic LNG terminals. In 2023, Russian LNG constituted 5% of the EU's gas consumption, filling the Kremlin's war chest with around 8 billion euros.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Europe has cut most of its ties with Russia, and we even capped the price of Russian oil. Turns out Moscow is very good at finding ways to beat the system. Incredibly so, in fact. They've developed a skill set in circumventing sanctions that's almost impressive if it wasn't used to fuel a war. One of the tricks in Russia's economic playbook is its creative accounting. Since the invasion, Russia has practically stopped publishing its trade statistics. So how do we know what's going on? Well, according to analysts, you have to play detective. Well, you must look at the data coming from countries who trade with Russia, and at times even some spy-level commercial tracking data. One essentially has to piece together the Russian economy like they're solving a murder mystery. For instance, while EU trade with Russia appears to have nosedived, Russia is still getting everything it needs through a spiderweb of intermediary countries. Need some luxury German cars? Just ask Kazakhstan to grab a couple and reroute them. Trying to build missiles? Don't worry, Belarus has your back. And if you need cutting-edge tech equipment or semiconductors, crucial for Russia's war effort, they're coming in via China, India, and even Turkey. Heck, even US-based companies like Intel and AMD are showing up in these trades, although not directly, of course. Russia's middlemen economy is booming. Oh, but don't just think it's all about clever trade routes and obscure custom records. It gets even more complicated. Remember those oil price caps the West set at $60 per barrel? Well, Russia's got a workaround for that too. By inflating transportation costs, they're siphoning off profits well beyond the price cap. Their oil, often blended with other sources to avoid detection, is still raking in cash. So while Europe pats itself on the back for punishing Moscow, Vladimir Putin is still very much stuffing his war chest. So what happens next? Russia's trade economy is slowly turning into an elaborate heist movie. It's got foreign companies involved, back-channel deals, and state officials playing along to keep the war engine going. But here's the question. Can Vladimir Putin continue to keep the economy afloat with middlemen, price manipulation, and secret bank accounts? Or is it about to collapse? Let's just hope when it does, the fallout doesn't end up hurting the rest of us. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Wojciech Jakubik, founder Ośrodek Bezpieczeństwa Energetycznego. Hello, sir. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us.
My pleasure.
So let me start by asking you about Russia's reliance on other countries. How has it increased or perhaps decreased after the West imposed its sanctions?
Russia is fully dependent on electronics supplies from China. It is also in need of insurance, of different services coming from Asian countries because they cannot get it from the West. You also have oil supplies and natural gas supplies redirected from Europe to Asia, to some extent, of course. Russia is losing the European market, so it is more and more dependent on Central Asia and Central and Eastern Asia countries because it needs to look for different places to put the hydrocarbons that are not finding any customers in the West. So Russia is heavily dependent, especially on China. It is like backstage, the hydrocarbon backstage of Chinese foreign policy. It is important for China, but it is a minor partner. Vladimir Putin needs to go to Asia. He needs to ask Asian counterparts to make something happen. And the most important example is the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline project, which is not going online. It is not going anywhere, actually. You have tough negotiations between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin on the price, on the business perspectives of this project. So Russia is just asking the Asian partners to cooperate. They cooperate, but this cooperation has its price.
Sir, let me ask you about natural gas specifically, because 14 packages of sanctions have been introduced. Supposedly, countries are supposed to reduce the reliance on Russian natural gas. However, some of them, such as France, continue to import natural gas from Russia, the LNG specifically. How is that possible?
That's true. It is possible because we don't have a full embargo on LNG supplies from Russia. It was discussed among the EU countries to do that last year, but it didn't happen. The 14 package of sanctions is not including any LNG embargo, so everything is in line with the law, but we should introduce this ban on LNG from Russia because, of course, the Gazprom position is diminishing in Europe and it could go to zero until 2027. But on the other hand, you have an alternative in Russia. It is Novatek, which is under sanctions. It is being sanctioned by US, but there are no sanctions in EU. There is no consensus for full LNG embargo on Russia, and we should underline it is important to make our work effective. If we want to stop Vladimir Putin, we need to adjust our sanctions to the situation, and this LNG part is really, really crucial.
And what is quite interesting, if I'm not mistaken, France has increased its imports of LNG from Russia in 2024 compared to 2023. How is that possible when there is this common consensus, right, that we're not supposed to do that? Yes.
It is legal, and you have plenty of LNG coming from Russia. They have some obstacles on the way, but they are providing cheap supply. So it is tempting for business players in Western Europe to use the LNG capacity to import this natural gas. But looking from the political perspective, it is impairing the effectiveness of our common work to stop Russian invasion in Ukraine, and we should introduce the LNG ban. So if we discuss the 15th package of EU sanctions, I hope Poland, Lithuania, different advisors of such measure will succeed and will have a full embargo on Russian LNG.
And so looking at the issue more holistically, following the introduction of Western sanctions, how has the energy market changed?
So we decrease reliance on Russia. The dependence on Russian gas supplies is 15%. In oil, it is even lower. We could reach zero imports from Russia in 2027, but we need to sustain the political will to do so. And the LNG case is showing that we have some issues. We have some economic temptations, but in the long run, it is also economically attractive to quit dependence on Russia, because no supply from Russia is secure. It could stop any time soon. Hungary sees that just right now. So the faster we quit dependence on Russia totally, the better. We are on the way. I hope there will be no going back.
Wojciech Jakubik, thank you, sir, for speaking with us. Much appreciated.
Thank you too. Bye.
And now we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. According to Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, the country's armed forces may occupy the territories captured in Russia's Kursk region indefinitely. What's the point of that? Well, here's the answer.
Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukraine intended to keep captured territory in Russia's Kursk region indefinitely in order to force Russian President Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. Still, the president of Ukraine stressed that Kyiv didn't seek Russian land in the long term. The rationale behind the incursion was to create a buffer zone to protect Ukrainian borderlands and divert Russian forces from other fronts. The stratagem produced some of the intended results, clearly convincing Russian commanders to move their troops out of the Kharkiv, Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. Zelensky ruled out the possibility of Ukrainian forces seizing Russian territory in the future.
It has been revealed that Russia has a secret trade plan with India that circumvents Western sanctions. The subject of the plan may not be as sensational as drugs or firearms, but it is just as essential to Moscow's war effort. So what might that be?
Russia has set up a clandestine route to acquire critical electronics from India. In October 2022, a Moscow-based consortium offered the Russian Ministry of Industry and Trade nearly $1 million in Indian rupees to spend on components once provided by Western countries and now subject to sanctions. The transactions were conducted through a closed payment system between Russian and Indian companies to avoid Western scrutiny. And so nearly $5 million worth of electronics, including drones, reportedly made their way into Russia, in addition to another shipment of goods to Kyrgyzstan, a backdoor for Russia's imports of sanctioned items. The Kremlin is sitting on a pile of rupees amassed from soaring oil sales to India amid sanctions, with trade between the two nations nearly doubling to $65 billion by 2023.
Ever since Russia launched its unjustified invasion of Ukraine, Hungary has played the role of a jester, laughing off any remarks about its suspiciously pro-Kremlin stance. Well, Budapest is keeping up the act, and here's more.
Hungary has shrugged off the EU's concerns about the country's novel work and residence permit system for Russian and Belarusian citizens. Budapest scoffed at the suggestion that extending the national card system to citizens of the two countries amid the war in Ukraine would increase the risk of espionage in the EU. Hungary's Minister for European Affairs, János Boka, claims that the country has issued only 14 national cards to Russian and Belarusian citizens since July, while other EU member states have granted them far more residency permits. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán is the only EU leader to have maintained close ties with the Kremlin since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Contrary to what the president of Kazakhstan promised, the country's media is not getting more openness. In reality, its new laws are more likely to silence critical journalism. And here's more on the topic.
Last month, Kazakhstan implemented stringent changes regulating domestic media. They allow a journalist's accreditation to be revoked for half a year if they twice overstep the rules at news events, which could potentially include asking off-topic questions. This does not sound like the greater openness President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev promised when running for the presidential office. Under the law that went into effect last month, the Foreign Ministry can also deny or revoke accreditation of foreign media outlets for any violation of Kazakh law. Another restrictive law banning foreign media from unaccredited journalistic activity was introduced in June. All of this has raised concerns among local and international rights groups about a potential threat to independent journalism and self-censorship.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. Thank you for watching and tune in for the next episode of Eastern Express tomorrow with your usual host.